Hello world and YouTube, my name is Hassan Al-Mahi. I'm 18 years old from Ontario, Canada. It is currently March 24th and it is early in the morning and I'm tired, but I wanted to make a part 2 to my Gen Z Deep Thoughts discussion. If you haven't watched my first video, I will link it in the description because this is a follow-up to that. So in today's video, I want to talk about the LGBTQ movement and its components, how it's annihilating the youth, and how I envision that how this could possibly ruin society, and also with regards to the idea of same-sex marriage and parenthood within that premise. Also, another topic I want to discuss is how Trudeau's government has been liberalizing tyranny in Canada, and also the right to how we have non-volatile free speech out of just and right cause. It is a very common constitutional right and topic with neighbors in our South, even though it's generally a universal principle within Western democratic societies. And also the idea of principle over passion. So, in terms of the first point, the LGBTQ movement, I just want to move here to the board to draw some things about it because I think it will help our discussion. So, the LGBTQ movement started way back in the 70s, found its roots, and originally the movement was for about getting awareness, getting some identity of lesbians, gays, and bisexuals within society. But what this movement now acknowledges no science. So we have a man and a woman. We have a man. Get some hair. I just drew a Sour Patch Kid in this, and then we have here a woman. A man and a woman. So, in terms of what I'm getting at here is the whole LGBTQ movement now is not about recognizing the differences with the genders, both socially and biologically, but now marginalizing the genders into definitions which make no sense. So, in terms of a boy and a girl, these are genders, these are sexes. They never change, they're set in stone. You are what you are, with one rare genetic anomaly, which some people try to bring into this whole LGBTQ movement about intersex people. So, intersex people it's a very rare statistical genetic anomaly that happens within certain society where the body parts of these intersex people are not distinguishable with any comparison to both male and female by scientific standards. So the question asks, and so what usually happens to these people? You're probably asking me. Well, generally what happens to these people is they, within scientific consultation, within the scientific method, the process, they determine through genetically structuring which of these body parts are more compatible with male or female, and they look at hormonals as well. They look deep in the chromosomes and the zygotes. So eventually these people they don't just remain intersex. They are either boy or girl, male, female. Alright, so we have that basic understanding. Very philosophical. And the idea now with LGBTQ is their ideas make no sense because they just logically don't make sense. Take, for example, a big part of LGBTQ, transgender. So transgender, the transition between a boy being a girl and then like saying he's a girl, so like transgender. Well, this makes no sense. Just because a boy says he's a girl doesn't mean he's a girl. He doesn't have girl hormones. He doesn't have the ability to reproduce. He doesn't have a girl genitalia. He doesn't have girl, and so on and so forth. He might not even have the qualities and certain things which are not distinguishable between a girl. He's not necessarily, for example, the natural gravitation of femininity, which means the natural gravitation of what boys and girls enjoy doing based on social and cultural and gender norms. What's set in stone is obviously biology, and this LGBTQ movement completely has nothing to do with biology, because one of their claims within even the transgender umbrella term, they call it, is the idea that sex is fluid, and that gender identity and expression are two different things. But then what's contradictory to that statement is by saying that a trans woman is a woman. But that makes no sense, because then that's just a conflation of gender expression, how you feel, how you sexually are attracted towards a specific gender, with the idea that gender is fluid. So it makes no sense that a trans woman can just say he's a woman, but then completely turns around and acts like a child when everyone tries to call him out on that. It's like they get so defensive, but they cannot just grasp this concept. So that's where you have it with that. But then another big idea within LGBTQ is this idea of them being marginalized and not accepted. This idea creates a premise for indoctrination. I'll explain how. So now you know that children can be succumb to this and affected this, and obviously in terms of the idea of talking about sexuality and gender, it's a very sensitive topic. It's approached with care and with privacy for good reason. But with the idea of schools pushing LGBTQ flags and sexual education, especially with the young kids, these are kids this can be from kindergarten literally, so like they're 3, 4 up to grade 3, so in their pre-pubescent years, 7, 8, excuse me, the idea that gender can be taught to them, and they, with their somewhat high mental capacity, can be able to understand what that means. But a 7-year-old is not thinking of gender. They just don't care. They're thinking of going outside. They think of playing with their friends. They're not thinking of any of this. So my thought is, then why are so many young kids getting where are they getting these ideas of gender from? If you really want a simple answer, you have to go back to the parents and the social norm, the education system within these these are persons of authorities that have been, in a sense, the parents not only have been enabling them, but they've not been speaking out, because maybe some arguments is that this is harmless or that you care. No, this is real. This is affecting children. I have a sister, my 12-year-old sister can go through it, and she is 12. She's barely started her life, and she's already wanting to get off the wrong foot. If I was a parent, and obviously I'm not, but so like I'm not representing a group of parents, but like that just calls for trouble. convince my parents, to convince my sister to take her out of the system, because I don't want her to get conflicting ideas. Or, what I've been even doing better now is I've been asking her, in terms of what have they taught you at school about gender? Have they started discussing? She says they have discussed it a bit, and they brought in the whole idea of LGBTQ, and that just made my eyes pop. It made me mad, because 12-year-olds, even though you can argue that they're beginning puberty and that they are more mentally aware than a younger child, 6 or 7 or 8, to be more aware of gender and their physiological capacity, are able to distinguish between reality and perception of reality, which is this LGBTQ movement, is absurd. They still can't. They just don't have that mental capacity. And even that was a thing in the news I heard a couple months ago. And this was even most recently popularized. The Rights Education Bill Act in Florida, in the US, they were talking about, the legislators there, talking about maybe regulating what school boards, what authorities can do as parents, like to protect the interests of the parents with their child, and going back to the child about gender education. So the idea of the bill was to not allow teachers and school board administrators and all that to teach gender and sex within approach. So K to 3, they cannot teach this. Like, go up to a certain age and yes, then gender can be inserted in the discussion. And that's great. I think that protects children and even prevents corruption of youth. Even though the fact that this bill had good intentions, it was completely disassembled in a wrongfully way and mistranslated by the media, that so many people just from the media didn't even understand. Did they even read the bill? I read the bill. It was 7 pages, and it was very detailed and gave very good methodical discussion and legal proceedings on how such things would be regulated in terms of local levels. So mainstream media called this the Don't Say Gay bill. The word gay was never mentioned in the thing. That was like disgusting by the mainstream media, CNN, NBC, whoever were reporting it at that time. It had nothing, actually, the bill had nothing to do with the LGBT movement, but the LGBTQ movement, as soft as they are and the snowflakes that they are, want to suddenly turn around and be hypocrites, saying that this bill is hate speech and will not allow children to develop gender identity. It just makes no sense. I mean, living by their rules in utopia, we're not allowed to have individualistic creative thoughts. We must agree. We must be drones. We must follow this mainstream movement in society. We must be able to do it. If we do not, we will be ostracized, penalized. We'll be told that the media and everyone hates you. This is not only a cult. This is toxic indiscrimination and indoctrination. And even some adults who are supposed to be the more mentally capable ones, sorry, this is my camera, are agreeing with some of this. I just don't get, like, they have, I don't know, some obligation, some social motive, some ulterior motive to support this. Maybe it's just that our people who are generation and millennials and baby boomers, we apparently cannot think straight. We cannot think critically and have smart thoughts. So that's the LGBTQ movement, and even how some of its components, such as I'm mentioning here also with the BLM and systemic racism that happens within, is all completely BS. They're social constructs with no actual real meaning to the statistics. And they never were. Their original goals might have had good intentions, but people switched around and became political campaigns. And what's even sad is, I know in the US, I listen to lots of lectures online and lots of speeches by prominent scholars, prominent senators on issues of government and social issues that are happening within the society. Even here in Canada, I like doing that. I do that more because I care. As an 18-year-old, I have rights in this country to vote for leaders. I have an opinion, and I should take advantage of that because it'll influence how I live, how my parents live, how everyone around me lives. So the idea is that on the political spectrum there in the US, it's becoming so marginalized and conflicted that people with thoughts of, in terms of what I'm going to come up to with, they have free speech and they have thoughts and original thoughts that they want to criticize or say something. They are simply, some of them are speaking out, conservatives. Most of them are just staying silent though, which I don't get. I think they're scared. I think they're cowardly a bit, because if you have something to say that's so important and so life-changing within society, you should say it. But what are you scared of? There's nothing they can do to you. It's illusionary power. This is how a cult works. These are all the signs of a cult. This just screams cult behavior, because the best way for a cult to gain a following is through separation, divide and conquer. There's this concept. This is a war concept in Sun Tzu's book, The Art of War. Apparently, these people are not very smart because they don't actually apply there's an underlying exception to this divide and conquer. Divide the people, make them fight, while individually staying in the shadow and building up your power. Power, what does that mean though? Politically, through the media, which is the number one, in our generation, the number one biggest source of how we get information, how we reflect on views, how we upload views, and also through mainstream cultural art. So this includes Hollywood, this includes activism, this idea of progressive and liberal establishments which are trying to promote politics. And then also there's the idea of religion. It's just now, like, religion is very complicated. It is a body of knowledge and a way of thinking. So it's at all levels philosophical, religious belief. It includes spirituality, and whether religion is important or not, of course it's important, and it definitely has some role to play in the society, in the sense that, for example, religious people tend to profess, in a sense, they advise people not necessarily why they are religious, but why religion can help you as you struggle through life. For example, how religion influences our way of thinking, how we can implement religion as a way of peace, as an actual way of thinking. It's a belief system, it's a moral code. In Islam, we call it creed. We have a creed that we abide by. It forms part of our basis for how we live our life. And of course, like all religions, religion is a peaceful structure. It's a peaceful concept. It's not supposed to be uninviting. It's supposed to actually does the opposite, I would argue, because religion, in a sense of monotheistic, is about a belief structure, and it's about admiration. So, with that though, there are certain things where societies within that are actual marginalized people that really don't actually are they are claimed by the left, the elite bureaucratic leftists, that they are part of their culture, that we're all in this together. But this doesn't actually convince me, because if people were to stay silent about issues like this and not actually agreeing to things, that says a lot about the person. That says they have very high social and mental awareness with regards to themselves, with regards to others. It takes some really good brain set and mindset to be able to have self-reflection and self-thoughts like that. So I'll give you an example. Lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and then you have like straight people, in terms of what is the idea of them getting married. Like, people tell me all the time, you're against love, you're against two women that like love each other, that want to kiss each other, that want to sleep in bed together. I'm like, well, no, I never said that. I'm not against that. But we have to consider what that looks like in a social perspective, and how one way we look at that is through marriage. Because one of the common things, the arguments from these people, is that if we love each other so much, we should get married, right? And the idea, I'm just going to give a general overview in my opinion, I'm not going to debate too much about this, but the idea is that most views, the views held by naturally almost everyone in the world, is that the biological concept is they can love each other, but can they start a family? Because like most people think of marriage as, especially religious people, as marriage as an institution, and that it's only something to take seriously. You could argue that. I'm actually a little bit against that argument, and for reasons that marriage doesn't have to be an institution, but we're not going to get into that because that's not what the talk is about. But if marriage allows people to love, would that also give them the right to have children? And the fact is that the people they identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, who through their own neurological and physiological desires, in science we call this term, with reference to how they were born, male or female, is, we as a society, we have a moral obligation to hear them out. This is not like something, it's not a big issue, but it's not something to just throw away lightly. This has, I wouldn't say repercussions, it's not a repercussion, but it has influences in how people live their life, how people tell their families that they're not attracted to their gender, or even in, like, so they're attracted to their gender and the other gender. So people say, yeah, that marriage should only be for procreation. Well, that's just that is not a sensical argument, because if that were the case, then single women, by that logic, are not good parents, or single parents, which is not true. Single parents can, within their own respective rights, genders, and their social and moral beliefs, can raise one child, and they can raise that child to be a good child and follow all the laws, be a good person, do something, whatever parents want their child to grow up as, is possible. But I will say though, with the idea of, let's say me, a man, say 10 years from now, I'll be 28, I'll be financially stable, I want to adopt a kid, because I want to raise a kid for my moral obligation. There's a lot of kids that don't grow up, they're orphans, they don't grow up with any parents, and they need to be placed in with a person of responsibility that can teach them life. Me, say, adopting a girl, someone who is not my gender, I could teach her how to hunt, I could teach her how to play soccer, I could teach her how to be a good student, I could teach her how to be an academic, teach her how to be a good thinker, how to work out, how to play. But I cannot teach her to be a woman, because I am not a woman. What I would need to do, from my standpoint, for able to become the best person, to give her all the options in her life, would be to get a woman involved. So whether that looks like, that could look like through family, or through what I call mentorship and counseling, in a sense. So that's just like bringing in a trusted female to be able to communicate with another female on a humanistic basis, to allow her to develop. So that's, but that is not just something to be taken lightly. That's, in a sense, that to you yourself, that's a societal issue. Because everyone perceives each other, we all have our own judgments on the world and stuff. No one's going to judge you for being a single mom, but they're going to judge you based on your actions. Whether that be fair or not, they're going to judge you. And that's just one thing that you have to get past. You have to be able to think of those thoughts individualistically and radically. Don't be extreme. Don't be radical, but have radicalistic thoughts. So that's just the basis. So with like two women, can they have a boy? Let's say like we have two lesbian women and they get married. This idea, which I would argue, like, in terms of from a legal standpoint, there's nothing wrong with it. They can get married. Could they have a boy? Raise a boy? No, not through natural means, not through any insemination, from adoption, and through these legal avenues of raising a child, a pure, innocent person who needs someone. Can they raise a boy? Well, the argument that I hold, and that most people hold, is yes, of course they're able to raise a boy. They could teach value. They give self-worth. But that's the thing, it's a double-sided coin. Because where you have value, you have destruction. And with destruction, nothing good comes with it. Because it's usually just a bunch of lies, deception, and falsities created by society and parents. So, one way to prevent that, I would assume a boy needs a man in his life. He needs a man able to give him strength and guidance. Very common attributes, or even, I would argue, they're natural attributes of the male gender, boys and men. And this would be able to protect the interests of the boy. This could, in a sense, though, also harm the boy, because a boy would be so lost in a world if other men And men like him have this idea of toxic masculinity around, which I talked about in the first episode, where even it comes to the point where boys are being abused in the beginning of life. Even girls are too. With girls, it's much worse though, because with girls it usually has to do with mental health cases they develop. With boys, studies show it's mostly that they grow violent, and they grow depressed, and they isolate themselves. It's really sad, and obviously no one should have to go through that. So how would we apply this though through society? Could that actually work? It's like someone asked me, well, that's your idea, okay, so you said that, how would you actually, if you were prime minister, let's say, how would you be able to apply that within law, within society? Well, I just simply say that there should be baselines and requirements for allowing for the least possible chance of children being exploited and abused. So what that looks like is, I personally have not thought about it that far to where I could be able to make some judgment on that. So that's the idea. The next topic is about Trudeau and how his government has been liberalizing tyranny in Canada. So the idea of patriotism and libertarianism is very humanistic in the Western societies, and it's something that they all have in common. But recently, with all this crazy stuff that has been coming out about Trudeau, what he did with the Freedom Convoy protests a couple months ago is absolutely disgusting. I have lost all my respect, whatever I had left of respect, because I personally do not support Mr. Trudeau. Never did, because I never liked any of his policies, never liked any of his actions towards the Canadian people. It's irreprehensible and disgusting. Mr. Trudeau realized that this was a peaceful protest. This started out as a protest with truckers. Truckers come from all over Canada about mask mandates. They're simply trying to make a case. And this guy decided that anyone supporting these protesters will be ostracized by the government. And in that sense, I mean, their bank accounts are literally frozen. So the government can now cut off financial aid if you literally do that. So that's great, awesome. And the fact is that the police, this is the worst part, the police were given authority through martial law, the Emergencies Act, which was created in near 1982. This was after Pierre Trudeau's government was formed, early 1900s, and this was the 80s area when there was a lot of suffrage and prohibition. Created an Emergencies Act which basically allows government to declare martial law, giving military authority over all of its jurisprudence and stuff. So Mr. Trudeau, for some reason, he felt so intimidated by these protesters, he activated this act, this Emergencies Act, and allowed the police to arrest and take down these truckers. Absolutely disgusting. I, for sure, will never respect Justin Trudeau again after what he's done. He is what he claims as liberal is actually authoritarian, and I can see through all of his lies, because some of the stuff, what his actions do not show in his intention. It's hypocritical. We can claim that people are being oppressed in Ukraine and that they are a democratic society, but at home, the world knows what you did to those truckers. It's just, And that brings me to the third topic about the right to non-volatile free speech out of just and right cause. And this is something I feel that I want to talk about because I've seen it a lot in the news and the media recently. And now we have suddenly had to redefine free speech. Free speech, by definition, on a philosophical level, what even anyone can attest to, is speech that does not allow violence, harm, or coercion, and speech that is allowed to be said freely. In the United States, this is one of their amendments, the right to free speech, the right to anyone have an opinion. This is very it's not that it's encouraging people to be aliens and have no opinion, but it's encouraging that humans all opinions have values, within society. And the fact is that some people are not clearly understanding that. Some people are putting hate in front of free speech. So I'll give you an example. A few days ago there was a video of Yale Law School students. They were having a classroom shut down. It was clearly bullying, what it was. Coercion, this was extortion. Basically it was two Yale professors. They were debating on different sides. They were a bipartisan panel. So two sides, one partisan debating on this side, and a partisan debating with the idea of the partisans finding common grounds. That's what the term comes from, bipartisan. Partisan meaning ideas that come together, and bi meaning two, the root word. So anyways, it was a discussion about how a Christian atheist and a conservative Christian, a liberal atheist and a conservative Christian, I think so, that was the title of the thing, about common ground about some U.S. Supreme Court law case. So what these students did, these college students, so what I have to possibly endure if I didn't have a mind, the idea that I can now go into a well-respected, well-educated classroom and shut down a debate simply because I don't like what even before they even started speaking, what they're going to say. You don't know what they're going to say. Where is the lie and where is the truth when it hasn't been spoken yet? This concept is absolutely ridiculous. You can't just do that. And if you really truly didn't like what they're about to say, or what they could say because maybe it personally offended you, the solution isn't just to riot and to yell with signs saying free speech is intolerable when your perception of free speech is completely wrong. But the fact is that sorry. I think I was not talking for a few minutes. The camera was like glitching out. I kept looking at it. That free speech all of a sudden would cause you, if it could cause you to walk out, then why would it cause you to do this? It's not simply just a matter of passion, about your feelings. This is about a topic that's being discussed and people. And in this case, it was actually for finding common ground. It was inviting a discussion about how to fix something, how to reconcile. So, absolutely disgusting, and Even I think the professors had to be like carried in a cop car. Professors cannot feel safe teaching on their own campus because the liberal left, they are the root of this problem, have convinced these students, adults, within all of this society, this craziness, that just because you don't like what someone is saying or was about to say, you can cancel them. Maybe this is cancel culture. Ridiculous. I mean, yeah, if I heard something I didn't like in a university lecture, I would do one or two things. I would either ask questions or I could leave. I could just do that instead of subjecting myself to more hate by yelling in a classroom, which is not, it's inappropriate for a professional standard to do that. And the fact is, they're so hypocritical. The liberal left, some of their fanatics, they claim that if they bring politics in, which everyone does, for example, that these liberal conservative people, they are my way or the highway. They're not argumentative, but they are objective in their views. You must believe this, that they're much more argumentative, when they're actually not. Some of the most intelligent people that I think that I've learned from were the most open, they were the most respectful, they had smart views, they had social empathy and awareness that allowed them to procure such views within their own respective jurisdictions and their experiences. I mean, you don't ever hear anyone on the left talking about an objective or subjective view on gender ideology. It always just pushes the same thing, and for good reason. Media censorship is very common. It's not that it doesn't happen, but it's just happening more now, and it's almost become like a joke in our culture. Of course, you always should speak out, and I encourage anyone who does. And we all learn from this. So the last idea I want to talk about is principle over passion. This is one of my favorite things ever that I have discovered. Well, not necessarily discovered as if I suddenly invented and came up with a light bulb like Thomas Edison, but an idea that has been very influential in my life. And honestly, I can thank people such as Dr. Jordan Peterson, who's a very prominent commentator and intellectual in Canada. An intellectual, for those who don't know, is someone who has critical thinking to solve problems on a societal level. Dr. Jordan Peterson is very renowned in psychology, a very tough disciple, I will say, for one to be able to master and apply in societal values. In terms of even what I said before, things such as the critical race theory and the gender, which that new bill is also pushing. There's a new bill in Canada that goes against that. They are all social constructs. They don't actually mean anything in their respective cultures, because it's not actually happening. What's happening is because for a different reason. What's happening is that these were inventions. But it's a diversion. It's not actually happening, and the proof is that is written in the history of the people who actually wrote this. The history of critical race theory teaches of a master race. Well, that's not true, because the only race that was known at that time, of those times within the 1800s to the 2000s, so the Victorian age, were predominantly white. And then all of a sudden we want to tell our children that it's inherent, we're all racist, but that's just simply not the truth if you care about history, facts, and science. Even archaeology will. get a good kick in the door of that. And also, I believe someone who has really good thoughts and actually like cares about people on the side is Mr. Poilievre. He's a PC, he's just put a Conservative Party in Canada, we call him the Tories. He's a shadow minister from Carleton, Ottawa, and I can personally say I think his ideas really align with my ideas on the issues that we actually have in society, whether that be right now current issues with vaccine mandates, with even the idea of our liberty, our civil rights in Canada coming under attack, and the idea of how we deal with, in this case also, concerns over our economy, keeping prices as low as possible, stopping inflation, which inflation, by the way, is as an economical term. It's misunderstood by a lot of people. They don't actually get what it means, means why the economies inflate. Because a lot of people think it has to do with foreign policy when it actually doesn't. But I can say that I actually think he really cares for society, and in the next federal election, I would definitely vote for him over Trudeau. No question about that. And he just seems like a great person to be around. So this topic about passion over principle applies to these people because it applies to someone in my life, my grandmother's brother, so my mom on my maternal side. I met him, and he really told me and influenced me about a few things as I was growing up, what I could expect from the world and how I view the world. So we're going to call him L to protect his privacy. And I was meeting L. I went to visit him with my grandmother in California. He lives in San Diego, city in the south of California, and he, honestly, I can say is one of the smartest, most academically intellectual person you could ever meet. He also has a great charm, personality, great person when I met him. And you know, me comparing to him, there's always a thing where like, if you're young, Hassan, I wasn't just saying it in Arabic because me and him, we were talking about the society, not that it doesn't trust you because of your age, and that doesn't trust younger people. We all live in this world, we all have to share it, we're sharing ideas, but the burden of responsibility is not on you, Hassan. You have to be able to create that burden of responsibility. You're talking about something called mastering the dark side. It's a concept within psychology that we have to not suddenly adapt everything. We have to think our ways we have to think radically in terms of how we do things every day in life. And he talked to me about three things that really apply when he was talking about the first lesson, talking about respecting other people's opinions. So he told me, he was critically thinking with me, in a sense. We were having discussions about free speech. This is in Arabic, but I'm just saying in English because it's basically just almost literally word for word what we were saying. But he was telling me about the idea that a young person who is very socially literate, has self-value, can contribute to a societal belief within the fact that they have a right to speak. So I told him that. So not being educated, not being an authority, what does that mean then for people? Can anyone speak out and say things in terms of a society? Or do they feel like they don't have to be silenced and they don't have necessarily a good understanding of a subject matter to be able to talk about it? Well, he says, of course, Hassan, this is why these Western society, why we build values on this. If we were to exclude by systemic discrimination, where one group cannot say anything while the rest are, we will be working backwards. So he told me that, and I believe that from the beginning. I feel like the way we've been thinking a lot of the things, we have to radically actually change our beliefs in how we solve certain things, such as actual racial discrimination, the idea of with this so-called New World Order that personally I'm not afraid of. It's gonna be fine. We just need more people speaking about against it, so we can slowly go back to normal, living our lives in peace and not hating each other and all that. Seeing not us by the color of our skin, but what we actually do, or the contents of our character. And even people, I think, that have great views on this, such as Rex Murphy and Kim Campbell, the 21st Prime Minister of Canada, was the only woman actually to be the Prime Minister of Canada so far, talked about for example, Kim Campbell in her civil career talked about the justices of critical thinking and applying it within societal age groups. So with that, and even with Rex Murphy has some great books that talk about, especially within Canada, within our bicameral system, the Westminster system, why these things possibly happen. Well, not possibly happen, but his analysis of why the system, the structures within Canada's history can all be linked back to the history of how it was perceived at the time. So for example, the 1800s, this Pierre Trudeau with the Quebec crisis, when he was dealing with that, how it shaped and affected and formed most of the beliefs at Canada, because that's when Canada was amalgamated and formed into a country. There was the July 1st, the Confederation, our founding fathers, with John A. Macdonald, you called it. It's actually an amalgamation, what it was. But anyways, that first lesson was really important, developing my brain and my mindset, able to think like that. And within that, though, there was a hidden lesson in it that he subtly warned me about. He said, when referring to someone, when you take a leader, or anyone that's leading power, and in terms of power definition, within the societal context, how we define it, within through government, within through social science, so this idea of sociology, how we define it through corruption, politics, and power, power enlightenment, which is the idea of perceptional power and real power, and the idea of how we control economy, all these things working together in conjunction like a cog wheel. He warned me that pride, deception, narcissism, and corruption are what causes governments to be oppressive in society and cause people to revolt against the government. It's like, it's not a government that does not care for its people, it's not loyal to its people. The government does not have the burden of responsibility towards the people. cannot be considered liberal, democratic, and by all means standards, because it is extremely dangerous. And he says that if you were to apply this on a societal basis, a lot of the rules and the fundamentals of game theory and natural selection would apply. And then the last lesson, my favorite lesson, was he told me, have some fun. I told him, what do you mean have some fun? So he went to school in Russia, and he was telling me, he was in his 4th year, he studies electricity. He was studying mechanical engineering with regards to a master's in electricity. He was doing a major, a 4-year program, he was telling me. This was back in the 90s. He was saying for his final assessment to get his 4th year degree from the professor, he had to write a 4-page study or review on Maxwell. But you don't know who Maxwell is. He's a founding father of electricity, all the theory and the equation and the math and deviation that comes from it. So it was very tough because he had to write and understand. He had to apply this on a 4-page basis. So the teacher gave him 50 questions from World Bank that could be available to him, that would come up on his exam. This guy told me, as we were walking down that park in San Diego, that he studied all the questions, all of them, 49, he got them in his excellent, but he left the last one. And you're probably thinking the same thing. So you left the last one knowing that it's a possibility that it could appear on your exam. He said, yes, I just looked over it. So then the next day, you already know what happens. I told him, so you got the question? I got the question. So he said, okay, so he said, but don't be scared. Have some fun with this. So, I don't know how he did it. He wrote the 4 pages with the understanding of the scientific approach and method to how you write a paper like this. Is very difficult too, because it requires showing that you have adequate knowledge of theory and mathematical equations. He wrote it like a poem, like poetry, like romanticism. This idea of the arts and culture, how he suddenly related arts and culture to mathematical derivatives and scientific concepts, theories. So he did that. The next day, when he said the teacher told him to read it out loud with him, the teacher was very impressed. He gave him full marks. He was able to take something that he didn't have memorization in but understood, with the hope that he had a negative mindset going in, me being a half glass full kind of guy, and be able to somehow turn that around. All on the basis of having fun, he called it. The first time he submitted that 4-page paper, he told me it was before practice. He said when the teacher read it, what are you teaching me here? Are you writing your life story? It's quite interesting, and says a lot about how we should apply that. Within our thinking. Interesting. It still sticks in me to this day. It's it was a great story. That's what it was. But either way, with the idea of putting passion over principle, or principle over passion, sorry. I'm really tired. Principle, the idea of your core main values and beliefs, should always be above passion, because principle defines you more than simply what your passion is, what your thoughts, what your emotions are, and things like that, which can be characterized by metaphysical attributes. That's you, that's humanism, that's your humanity. But the idea of principles, things you apply, this is all a game theory concept, theory and application. So in terms of your causes and your righteousness, your cause can be in principle and your righteousness can be in passion. But what happens when the two suddenly want to converge? You're always thinking that you should pick one over the other. And the idea is, if people want to speak up, they want to put passion over principle. But this is like from, I think, the 1984 movie, if you've seen it, Karate Kid. Mr. Miyagi, a karate instructor, teaches Daniel, he applied this like in his karate class about principle over passion, because Daniel was like getting beat up in the movie by Johnny, some gang from the Cobra Kai, that's their dojo, so it was a rival dojo thing. And Mr. Miyagi realized that the idea of hate, anger as a passion, as a metaphysically existing passion within both it's even both in a spiritually, physically, and through our mental capacity, or physmentality, it's a crossover term, is never to be defined as something definite, but our principles are ingrained. And very rarely should you ever very rarely do you ever see your principles over passion. That usually has to do with things where principles get misaligned with passion. So very rarely can you combine the two, with rare exceptions, because if you want to combine the two or leave one out, what that leaves room is things like pride, too much overconfidence, ego, and then that just leads to the downfall. So the last topic is about matriarchy and patriarchy in societies. We must define what patriarchy is. Patriarchy it's a hierarchy of men having dominance over women in all aspects of social, historical term, government, societies, where men dominate, control, and they are given most of the logistical and legal applications within society. So one example of a common patriarch would be the Roman societies, where they had Roman emperors with Augustus I, ending with Julius Caesar with the Republic. Those were patriarchies. Patriarchies were paternal, H, and archy, a hierarchy, a social structure, would allow one gender, sex, not sexual, how we express ourselves, because they are different, no conflation, how they could be in society leading every single decision in that sense. And then with matriarchy, it's just the same thing, but just with a woman on the thing. So the idea is, why do patriarchies work? What is the point of like patriarchy? Patriarchy was a means of protecting men's lineage rights, and that's what inheritance. It was giving men the social, the gender roles, gender norms that were developed through men of being leaders, powerful, and very action-driven, passionate. these values in my opinion, they are natural. They are within the natural realm of manhood. So the idea is, why is the patriarchy so, in terms of even, I'm not talking about biological differences between men and women, all this strength, all of this, why is the patriarchy so defined and developed by historically these societies? One reason that's common is that the men, the rulers in these societies were, in a sense, they were action driven. So what that means is, when they were leading these societies, they had clear goals and they had actions to reach the goals. Ones who, in a sense, cared, especially in terms of, there's many different caste systems in aristocracy, with the royal systems, with the crown. And being one example is the male patriarchy has, in a sense, always existed. We are unique because we can lead. And then another thing is the social implications, in terms of, throughout this is from a historical argument, men were always chosen, or were always wanted to be leaders, because by that standard, men were better leaders. They were more authoritative. They had to do what needed to be done for the societies at that time. And especially even with those early societies, a lot of people say now, why can men and women never be equal? Because they never were equal. The rights and equality are different. Women were, in the earliest century, in 600 AD, were considered objects. Like, they were not actual people. They were sold, they were bought at the pleasures and guises of men. Guises in terms of, they were thought not to be slaves, but that's what they were. And the idea that on any level, even within inheritance, something as simple as that, where women were not equal to men in that regard. So that begs the question, what about matriarchies in society? This would be interesting, because historically, matriarchies have always been power driven and hungry. What happened with matriarchies is that in societies, for example, in the 1800s, this is before the Enlightenment, when Marie Antoinette, the regent of King Louis VIII, was ruling the crown. In that case, in that specific, there was the French Revolution that occurred after. But with matriarchies, women were not even proven, and were, in a sense, they were not shown, not trusted that they could lead. So what would happen is, when a woman did try to lead, which in terms of their ability to do on the science of whether they can actually be good leaders, it's nothing about that. Men were trying to take over their power. Men had ambitions, what you can say, with in terms of, some argue that it was religious discourse, or that was simply tyranny. It's debatable, it's a historical topic, but in that case with Louis VIII, the Sun King, women also, beyond the point that matriarchies never worked well, when women did lead, and historically within societies, compared to patriarchal societies, they never developed in terms of arts and culture and scientific progress. This could be due to the reason that women were much more, in patriarchal societies, they were much more concerned with ruling the government, not ruling the institutions. Government in the sense that they were concerned about the people, not what allowing the people would do to arts, culture, and the scientific discoveries of a culture. So that's, historically, that's been proven true. And it's been attested to, and that's the reasons and arguments why matriarchies don't, in comparison, they're not, women aren't really at the top position. And it has nothing to do with trust and responsibility. It's just within, through the lens of this argument, this historical lens, men always, for better or worse, were encouraging more change and were more actionable in society. What would matriarchy? There has been a study by scientists already a few years ago that matriarchy, some of them that still exist obviously in the world today. Some African countries, for example, have mothers leading the whole tribe, a woman, a female, adult human, that they would be more lovable, and that it's better for the people in that sense, because like women, it's in a sense that the biological inheritance, the biological deviation of a woman is to be very caring, like a caregiver. That was the basis of the articles, based on this psychological, not inhibition, but psychological desire from the biological standpoint. So it's interesting. I mean, I will say, women in I've never been really criticized more than women than I have with men. It's my own gender that's been criticizing my growing up instead of women. But that's typically the arguments, and it brings good discussion. So thank you for listening to this. I'm seeing now it's been recorded for an hour. Appreciate you, kind of, if you did make it to the end of this. But honestly, just stay happy and healthy, you guys. I will leave my thoughts here, and I will leave all of the time marks and things in the description in regards to the sources that I point out in this video. Thank you.